Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you have not been here, my name is Karina Joy and I love to talk about books. If you are returning, welcome back, and this is going to be a recommendation video of Francine Rivers books that are worth picking up. Okay, so in the Christian world, there is mixed feelings about Francine Rivers. Now, I have read nearly all of her books, not all of them, but nearly all of them, and I understand. I get it. Some of her books, I feel like, toe a line on the sexual side that is a little much for Christian books. Now, Francine Rivers used to be a romance author, and I think that might be why she tends to go down that route. What I mean by towing the line is when she talks about sexual situations, she tends to give more descriptors than most Christian books would give. Actually, probably every Christian book I've ever read, I didn't see anything quite like what Francine Rivers has in her books. And I'm uncomfortable with that. So this is not going to be a recommendation video that has those types of books in it. There is one that does have some sexual abuse, and that one, she doesn't go into a whole lot of detail, but if you are not comfortable with sexual abuse, that one might cause you to pause a little bit. So I will let you know which one that is, but all of these other ones don't have any of this in it, and they are amazing books. So we're going to get started, and I'm just going to talk about each one and let you know kind of the basic synopsis and how much I loved the book and why I think you would like it. I lost my phone. You know, life. Okay, so on this list are 2 series of books and then 2 standalone books. So I'm going to start with the series and then we'll go from there. So the first series is Marta's Legacy, and this is a duology. This is, the 2 books in it are Her Mother's Hope and Her Daughter's Dream. Now, it's been, I would say, about 5 years since I've read these. I know the basic, like I remember the story, but I think I'm just going to read part of the synopsis for you so that the wording makes sense, because when there's been that much of a gap, it's hard for me to explain things. So I'll just read to you what it is about and then tell you what I liked about the story and what I think you might like. Okay, so A Mother's Hope is a family saga. It follows 3 generations of women, starting in Switzerland, let's see, before World War II. So we start with the grandmother of the family, and then we move on through the daughter and then the granddaughter. So I'm going to read the synopsis of the first book. You don't want to know the synopsis of the second book because it'll give things away, but I will read it for you. Okay, so Her Mother's Hope follows a family as they discover what sacrifices it takes to show unconditional love. As the first in a family saga, the story begins with Marta Schneider as she leaves Switzerland and embarks on a journey that will forever change the course of her family's history. As she suffers wars and hardships, she is determined to have her way until she has kids of her own. Her stubbornness gives her strength to raise strong children, but Hildemara, her oldest daughter, misinterprets this strength for distance. As World War II approaches, Hildy forges her own path to win her mother's respect. But when an illness overtakes her, will her own daughter misinterpret her love as distance as well? Okay, so this is a story about a woman, Marta, who is born in Switzerland, and it starts when she's a little girl, and it goes through her life as she immigrates to the United States, starts her own business, finds a husband, has a family. She is German, and so she immigrates to Canada in the first place. Then her and her husband move to the West a few years later, and then they immigrate to California. And so when they immigrate to California, they are German, and it is during World War II. So that is around the time that her daughter Hildemara is a young child. And most of the story, if I remember correctly, follows their time while they are navigating being German during World War II in the United States. And like it says, Marta is a very tough woman, and because of that, Hildy feels like her mom doesn't love her. Even though her mom loves her with all of her heart, it comes off the wrong way. And unfortunately, that in turn follows down in the generations. Now, this is the one that I gave you a warning about sexual abuse. I won't tell you when or where or who, because you need to read it if you want to, but there is a instance of sexual abuse. If I remember, it's only described once, and it's not a long description, but you definitely know what's going on. So if that is something that you're not comfortable reading, this would not be the duology for you to read. But I loved this duology because I really enjoyed it following the generations and starting out in the early 1900s and then going through World War II and on into the 60s, and you follow the hippie movement, and it's just a really good story. There's places in it that will make you cry, and there's places in it that will just kind of give you a good feeling, and it is just a really good book. And the nice thing is, at the end of the duology, I feel like she wraps it up really nice. Everything is answered, and it ends well. So I think you should pick that one up, because it's hard to find a good Christian family saga that isn't cheesy, and I feel like this one is not. This one follows this family, and they have struggles, and they're very real struggles, and it follows their relationship with Christ as they go. So pick that one up. That one's good. So the next series that I am going to talk about is the Mark of the Lion trilogy. Now this one is completely different. It is about a young woman in 75 AD who is Jewish, and she is living in Jerusalem when Jerusalem is taken over by the Romans. So the book starts out in the middle of the siege on Jerusalem and all of the things that came with that. I started this book in the airport, headed to Indiana, and I was crying hysterically, not hysterically, but I was bawling reading the first few chapters because they are intense, but very, very, very well written and very good. Okay, so it's a trilogy, so of course there's 3 books in the series: A Voice in the Wind, An Echo in the Darkness, and As Sure as the Dawn. Now, they each follow a different character, but they are all woven together. The first 2, I would say, you could probably read them. Well, you can. You can read just the first two if you want. They're the only ones that are really tied together. You would want to read them in order so that you get the full impact of the story. The third one is about a gladiator that is woven throughout the first two books, but it's a completely separate story. And honestly, it wasn't as good. I didn't enjoy it as much. I still enjoyed it, but not near as good. A Voice in the Wind and An Echo in Darkness. A Voice in the Wind is about Hadassah. Now, Hadassah, like I said, she was in the siege of Jerusalem. She ends up getting put into slavery, and her father was healed by Jesus when he was alive, and so they believe in Jesus as their savior. And so they believe in Jesus as their savior, and she serves Christ. Now, she gets sold to this family that the husband and wife treat her really well. Their oldest son treats her okay. Their daughter is completely and totally spoiled, and she's the one that Hadassah is the servant to, and she treats her horribly. So the story is a lot about that. Now, I will say this is more of a saga. This spans years and years and years, and there's so much information. It is definitely a character-driven story. So if you are not into that kind of thing, this one might drag on for you a little bit. So definitely not something for somebody that's plot-driven, but it is so good. Now, like I said, the first two books are my favorite. So the second book is about Marcus. That is the oldest son of this couple that bought Hadassah as a slave. And he is going through life, and he has seen Hadassah's faith, and he struggles with whether or not he wants to have that kind of faith or not. And a whole bunch of stuff happens that I can't tell you about, because if I did, it would completely ruin it for you. But it is definitely worth a read. This one doesn't have any sexual scenes at all. I want to make sure that's correct. I'm pretty sure there's no sexual scenes. Now, it's been a while since I read it, so I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's none. The whole time I was reading all of her books, I was very considerate of that fact, because I was like, wait a minute, this shouldn't be in a Christian book, or she shouldn't have dealt with it like that. So I'm pretty sure this series doesn't have any of that, because I don't remember feeling that way about the books, but hopefully I'm not wrong on that. But you should read this one as a Christian. It really dives into the way that Christians were treated back then and the persecution that they went through. And it does it in a way that doesn't mince words or fluff things up. You see how terrible it was, and it helped me appreciate the Christian walk that I am privileged to have right now in the world we live in, where I'm at. I don't face persecution, thankfully, but at some point in life I might, and reading books like this really helped me to understand how I need to be prepared and how I need to have God's word in my heart, because there might be a day that I don't have his word with me. And back then, that's how it was. They had to memorize all of the stuff, all of the scriptures, so that they could have them in their hearts and live by them. And so, yeah, this follows Hadassah's faith, and she is able to give grace to this girl that treats her terribly, and she essentially becomes a minister to this family. So I think you should really try reading this one if you haven't, because it is not like any of her other books. Honestly, I feel like this would have to be her best work. It's by far my favorite work. So yeah, try the Mark of the Lion series. Okay, so the next two are standalone titles. The next one I'm going to talk about is The Scarlet Thread. Okay, so this is about a girl who is, let me just read this so that it doesn't sound real confusing. Sierra Clanton Madrid can't believe her husband Alex would take a new job and uproot the family to Los Angeles without consulting her. Armed with righteous anger, Sierra turns their home into a battleground, even after they make the move. Alex chases success, both business and social, to compensate for his insecurities about his Hispanic immigrant roots. Both Alex and Sierra are so caught up in themselves that neither tries to understand the other or seeks God's will. Soon their perfect marriage lies in shambles. Seeing the need for God, Sierra's mother gives her the journal of a female ancestor and a handcrafted quilt made with scarlet thread. Now, this is in dual timelines, so the story about Sierra is in the present day timeline, and she is really, really struggling spiritually, emotionally, all of that, because of the problems with her marriage. The other timeline follows a girl, an ancestor of hers that is female. I don't remember her name because it's been years since I've read this, but it follows a woman who, her husband chooses to go on the Oregon Trail and trek across the United States. And it talks about all the things that happened on the Oregon Trail. She starts her journal before the Oregon Trail and continues it until she gets there and afterwards. And it is one of those stories that will make you cry sometimes. And then there's some redemption in the end, and it was a really good one. So I think you should try it because I haven't ever read anything like it. I really enjoyed reading about the Oregon Trail and the fact that this girl is essentially learning from her ancestors' past, and I enjoyed it so much. All of these books I gave 5 stars, by the way. They were my favorites by Francine Rivers. Okay, and so the last one is The Last Sin Eater. Okay, so The Last Sin Eater happens in the Appalachian Mountains, and it is about their culture and some of the superstitions and beliefs that they had. So I'm going to read this because I'm sure they explain it so much better than me, but yeah. Okay, so The Last Sin Eater revolves around Katie Forbes, 10-year-old girl who lives in a settlement community of Welsh Americans in the mid-1850s. Katie carries a heavy burden of guilt and grief because of something that happened the year before. At the beginning of the novel, Katie's grandmother, Gorowyn, has just died. At her funeral, the village's sin eater comes, and Katie does the forbidden and makes eye contact with him. The next day, Katie goes to the river thinking about how to get rid of the sins that she carries. At that time, a little girl named Lilibet appears, and after talking with her, Katie decides to visit the sin eater in the hopes that he can take her sins from her. Katie is the only one who can see or hear Lilibet, and her parents and others begin to believe that she is keeping company with taints and that the girl is a demon. Katie seeks out the sin eater by talking first to Elda Kendrick, who is the oldest person in the village. Okay, so Wikipedia has this huge description of it. But essentially, I don't want to spoil anything because I can't remember where they reveal things in the book. So I think I'm going to leave it at that because that seems to give you enough to pique your interest if you're interested in something like that. This book is really, really good. It really dives into the superstitions that this group of people have. And I would say that in a way it's an allegory. I'm not sure if anybody considers it that. I'd have to do research and see. But given that the last sin eater takes people's sins, I mean, you can kind of see where that is. I don't want to say much more about this because it's so good and I don't want to give it away. But this is honestly a book that I have never heard of on BookTube, and it is a shame because this is one of the best books I've ever read, and I would really appreciate if people would read it so we can talk about it because it's good. I actually need to reread it because it's been, like I said, years since I've read it, but it's definitely one that I would love to reread and just kind of dive into a little bit more because there's so much depth in this story. I really think you need to read it. Maybe I should do like a read along for that one because it's a good one. And I don't think there's very many people that I've seen on here that have read it. So I think I'll do a read along at some point for that one. But anyway, so Francine Rivers, one thing that I really appreciate about her is that she, first of all of her books are very well researched. You can tell she just dives into the time period and the history that she is writing about. The second thing that I really love is that her books are very different. I have also read most of Karen Kingsbury's works. She's another Christian author and one that I don't hear of much on here. And while I loved Karen Kingsbury's stuff, after a while I got to a point where I didn't want to read anymore because it seemed like every story was very similar and had the same tropes and the same types of characters, and I just didn't like that. I wanted something different. So what I appreciate about Francine Rivers is that each one of the books that I've read by her is completely and totally different. The content's different, the message is different. That's what I love about Francine Rivers. She has this way of pulling you into a story and grabbing you to a point where you just can't put the book down. So I love her writing. Those are the things I love about Francine Rivers. The drawback that I've found and that a lot of Christians are not comfortable with, and I understand why, is some of her sexual scenes in books. Now, I would have to say, I've never read one that I felt like was smut, and I've never read one that was longer than maybe a paragraph or a page. And most of the time, the reason behind the scenes have a purpose. It's not just in there just to be there. It has to do with the life of the person. So for instance, Redeeming Love, she's a prostitute. And there are a lot of things in that book, but the reason they're there is to show her the damage that life does to her and what it causes. That's not one that's my favorite. I don't have a problem with it, but it's not one that I'm like, yeah, go read that. it's fine. I would say I probably would give that one like a 3-star. I read it long before I rated books. But that's one thing that I do have to say. The scenes that people are concerned about are usually not just there, or they're not there just to be there. There's a purpose behind them. And that's what I have to say about it, you know? Francine Rivers has some wonderful books that not a lot of people talk about. A lot of people are stuck on redeeming love, and I understand why. It's very popular, and you either love it or you hate it. It's, you know, it is what it is. But there's other books by her, and I feel like we need to give those books a chance, and we need to talk about those because they're fantastic. So the main reason why I created this video is so that you would see some other books recommended that are not the typical Francine Rivers books, and maybe find some more of your favorites, because these are certainly, let's see, there's 5, these 7 books are some of my top favorite books of all times. And they're just fantastic. So, I could keep going, but I'm not going to. So, try these out. Let me know when you do so that we can talk about it. If you have read any of these books, please let me know what you think about them in the comments below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.